All right, guys, we are going to start writing our first lines of code. So this is going to be front end only, no dynamic content just yet. And we're going to start with our homepage. So off camera, I've gone ahead and created a podcast.fm static directory and opened that up in Sublime Text. So we have no files or anything just yet. And I have my Photoshop design of the homepage open up as well. So what I'm going to do is let's go into Sublime, and inside of here, let's right click, create a new file. And I'm going to save this as index.html. And then if I go back to my directory, I can now see the index.html. Nothing's in there. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this and then drop it into Chrome. So you can see that this is working. If I go like H1, say this works, and then go back to Chrome and refresh, you can see this works, appears right there. Perfect. So we are good to go. The first thing we need to do is set a doc type for our page. So I'm going to do doc type HTML, and then we need to define the structure of the HTML. So I'll do HTML, and then inside of here, I'll do a head. A head. Then inside the head, I'll do a title, and let's call this podcast.fm. Then under the head section, let's do a body, and let's go back to our design real quick. It says discover your new favorite podcast or create your own. I'm going to grab that text, and then I'm just going to do H1, an H1 tag, and paste that in. So let's go back to Chrome, refresh. Okay, so how we're going to go about this is we are going to write up the HTML structure for this page, and then we will add these styles. So let's go back to Sublime. We need a div to hold the background image. So I'm going to create a div with an ID of background. And what I did just there is I am using something called Emmet, E-M-M-E-T. The essential toolkit for web developers. I would definitely recommend going to emmet.io and checking that out. It's super handy. All right, so let's go back to Sublime. So inside of the background div, let's create a header. And then inside the header, we need a logo. So let's make an A tag for the link, which will link back to this homepage. I'll make this with an ID of logo to use for later. I'm just going to stub it out for now, put a hashtag symbol in there. And then inside of here, I'll just say podcast.fm because that's going to be our logo. Then let's create our nav. If we go back to our Photoshop, we have explore, sign in, and create a podcast. So I'm going to create a nav, and then inside of here, so I'm going to write UL greater than symbol li, and then we want 3 li's, so I'm going to do li times 3, and then I'm going to do an a. So what this is going to do is, because I'm using Emmet, I can write this short line of code, hit tab, and it will print that out for us, which is one of the powerful things. It will speed up your development time quite a lot, so I definitely recommend checking that out. So now that we have the list for our navigation, let's just stub it out, and inside of here I'm gonna write explore, the next one stub out, and then assign in link, stub out, and create a podcast link. Save that, go back to Chrome. All right, so we got our logo, our navigation, and then below here, back in our design, we have a create a podcast button and an explore button. So let's go under the H1 and let's create 2 A tags. So I'm going to say A, and I'm going to give this 2 classes that we'll later write in the CSS, button and a button highlight class. And we'll stub this out as well. And then I'm going to say create a podcast. If we go back, we can refresh. Then if I right click and inspect the element using Chrome Developer Tools, let me bump that up so you guys can see it. So this create a podcast now has button and a button highlight classes on it. Let's go back and create another one, A and another button class, but this one's going to be button white, because if you remember in our design, this one is the highlighted button and this one is the white button. And then we'll sub this out as well, and I'll say explore. Go back, refresh. So this is pretty much all we have on the home page, structure-wise. Okay, so let's begin our styling. So I'm going to go back to Sublime. I'm going to create a new folder under the podcast.fm static directory. And let's call this SCSS, because I'm going to use SCSS to write our styles. And then I'm going to use a program called CodeKit. This is what we are going to use to compile our SCSS into CSS. So if you don't have CodeKit, Rails by default will compile this SCSS as long as you're using an SCSS extension. But for this tutorial, I'm going to use CodeKit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the podcast.fm static directory and just drop it on here. Okay, to start out, we are going to create a new file and save this under the SCSS folder. And I will call this application.css or .scss, I'm sorry. And I'm calling it this because in our Rails application, we will have an application.scss that we will import the other styles into. So let's just match that as close as possible. And then in CodeKit, I'm going to click on SCSS and have it output the file into a CSS directory, an application.css file. So all I need to do is do something like, if I change the background color of the body to red, you can see that CodeKit created the SCSS folder and the application.css file for us. Perfect. If we go back and refresh, nothing will happen, and that is because in our index, we need to link to that CSS file. So what we're going to do is write a link, rel style sheet. This is going to be a relative link, and we're going to go to the CSS folder and the application.css file. So now if I go back and refresh, you can see that hideous color of red is showing up. So let's definitely remove that. Okay, so what we are going to do now is create a additional SCSS file to store the styles just for our front page or the home page. So I'm going to call this home.scss. And inside of our application.css, I'm going to do @import home. And then I will just say colon. Save that. So now I can do the same thing, right? Body, background, red. Go back and refresh, and the background is now red. So I'm going to hit Command Option 2 to make this 2 columns in Sublime. And I'm going to bring the home.css into one column and the index into another. And then I'll hit Command KB and remove the sidebar. This way we can work side by side and see everything that's going on. So what I want to do is first target this background ID. So I'm going to, oops. So in the home.css, I'll do #background. So what we want to do is get this background image to be full width and full height of the viewport. So to do that, let's go ahead and get rid of everything. And then we are going to export this. Image size 2880 is far too big, so let's change that to 1500 pixels wide. And because it's a photograph, a PNG is not the ideal format. So let's do a JPEG instead. And you can see the file size down at the bottom right is 414 kilobytes. Let's try to drop that down a bit. Let's drop the quality to 80%, and that nearly drops it to 154, nearly in half, or over half actually. And the quality of it still looks pretty good. Let's try dropping it a bit more. 75 is probably good. We got it down to 134 kilobytes. So let's save that. And I'm going to save that into the podcast static. And let's create a new directory called images. And I'm going to say homepage underscore background, and then hit enter to save that. Now if we go back to Sublime, hit Command KB to bring up the sidebar, you can now see the images directory is there with the background image. Okay, so how do we get the background image to show up, in Chrome? Well, we need to write a few styles. First, let's add the background image to the background div. So I'm going to do background-image, and then we're going to do a URL to the image, and it's going to be /images. And the / is because currently we are in the CSS folder, and we need to move up out of that. So the // is moving up a directory, and then we are going to go into the images folder and then select the homepage background.jpg. So images / homepage background.jpg, and then colon. So let's go and refresh so you can see it's now showing up, but we want it to take up the full height. So I'm going to do height 100 VH, and this is a viewport height right here. And then we're going to do background size, cover, background position, center, and we're going to text align center. So let's refresh that. That looks great. One thing I just realized is you can see this is taking up 100% of the viewport, but the title and the buttons are not inside of the background div. So let's grab those, copy, delete them, and then let's move into the background div and paste those in. Now if we refresh, there we go. So you can see Discover Your Own Podcast. As you may have noticed, there's this ugly border around, and that is because by default, the browsers of all kinds, by default, browsers add their own styling defaults. So we want to use something like normalize.css. Basically, normalize is a modern, you can see HTML5 ready alternative to CSS resets. So basically, it makes every browser start from the same starting point. So what we're going to do is download that, and I'm going to copy, do a select A, copy all that, and then let's go back to our Sublime, create a new file, save this as normalize.scss, paste that in, save it, and close out of it. Then in our application.css, above the home, we are going to import normalize. So basically this resets the browser, and then our styles are applied afterwards. So if we go back, refresh, you can see that border is removed. The ugly serif font is gone. Okay, so this is looking good. So what we need to do next is I want to write some application specific styles. So with SCSS, we can do some really cool things. For one, we can set variables. So I can say the white is the hex color for white. And I can go to Photoshop. Let's bring back let's grab this color right here. It's D2674E, copy that. Let's go back and let's do $highlight, colon, is that color. And then let's grab the dark color. Whoops, back to Photoshop. Let's go to our color scheme. And I'm going to select that dark color. I'll say dark. Whoops. I actually did not copy that. There we go. For the reason variables like this are awesome is because if you use it, say, half a dozen times or even more than that throughout your application, say the highlight color of your design changed from the orangish red color to say a blue color. All you would have to do is change it once for this variable and it would update everywhere that it's used. So the next thing I want to do is write some styles for our wrappers. So let's do wrapper wide, and we're going to do width of 90% and margin 0 auto. Now let's create another one called wrapper. Let's make it width of like 80%, margin 0 auto. And then let's make a skinny wrapper as well. Wrapper skinny, width of 60%. And what we're going to do with this is we're going to go into our index.html file, and around our navigation, we're going to put a wrapper. So I'm going to say wrapper wide. Let's delete that end div and tab everything over and add that end div to the bottom. And if we go back, well, everything's text line center. Let me comment that out right now. So you can see everything that's not within the wrapper is pushed up against the edge. The stuff that is in the wrapper is set to go as far as 90%. So if I change this to wrapper skinny, for example, refreshed, now it's only 60% of the viewport. So let's keep that as wrapper wide. And then let's create another div. Let's put the content in a wrapper skinny div. Copy that. And let's move it in here. Now if we refresh, all right, this is coming along. Okay, so let's take care of the styling for our header. So let's go back to Sublime. So normal CSS, we would do something like background and then header, and then open it like that. But with SCSS, we can do what's called nesting and just write it inside of this like so. So now I'm accessing the background and then the header. Then inside of here, let's access the ID of logo. So the logo, we want it to float left. Let's do a text transform uppercase. Let's make the font weight 700. Let's make the color white, and we're going to use that white variable from before. And then we're going to do text decoration none. So what this is doing is it's taking the underline out, changing the color to white, making the font weight bold, making all the letters uppercase, and floating it to the left. So if we go back and refresh, you can see podcast.fm. Perfect. Let's add some padding to the entire header div. So padding 3 rem 0. So what this is going to do is put padding of 3 rem on top and bottom. And a rem is a unit of measurement in CSS, just like VH and just like pixel. But instead of being an absolute measurement, it's a relative measurement, which is why for responsive design, you definitely want to use something like rem instead of pixels. All right, so now let's get the navigation fixed. So we're going to make sure we're out of the logo div, and then let's write nav, go in there. Let's float that to the right, save that, go back and refresh. You can see the navigation is now floated right. Let's target the UL. Let's say list style none to remove those bullet points. We're going to remove the margin because by default ULs have a margin. And then we're going to target the LI, and we're going to do display inline. Go back, refresh. That puts them all on a single row. We're going to do a margin left of 2.5 rem, and that's going to push everything over to the left. And then let's and then if we go back to our HTML, we can see inside of our LI we have A tags. So we'll grab the A, and then we'll change the color to the white and remove the underline. So text decoration none. Go back and refresh. All right, so this is looking good. So we also need to add a clear fix. What a clear fix is since the logo is floated to the left and the navigation is floated to the right, that means this content is being pushed up because this is technically out of the DOM because it's floating on top. So a clear fix will make sure that this doesn't get pushed up. So instead of writing clear fix for just that single thing, let's go to application.css and let's write a little class to handle the clear fix. So we're going to do clear fix before, comma, .clear cf after, and we're going to do content quotes and then display table. This is a little clear fix hack. It's quite useful. And then we'll do another clear fix after, and then we'll do clear both. So now if we go to the header, let's add a class of CF. Go back and refresh. So now the content below is cleared, which is exactly what we want. All right, so let's go back and finish the styles for the title and the buttons. Let's remove the text line center. So outside of the header, so make sure you are lining this all up correctly. So we're going to do an H1 to target the H1 title. Let's do a color of white. Let's make it a font size of 3.5 rem. So if we go back and refresh, it's pretty big. We don't want the font weight to be that bold, so let's do font weight of 300. And then we're going to do a letter spacing, which is kerning in CSS. We're going to make it 1 pixel to space it out just a tiny bit. And let's do a margin, top of 7 rem, left of 0, bottom of 2 rem, and right, actually, I'm sorry, top of 7 rem, right of 0, bottom 2 rem, and left of 0. Let's go back and refresh. Perfect. And let's, I should have kept that text line center. All right, so now everything is centered as it should be. Now let's take care of these buttons. So the button will probably be used on more than just the home page. So what we want to do is add this to the application.css file. So the button styles, we're going to do .button. Let's make a color of white by default. Text decoration, none. Font size, we'll make it 1 rem. Padding, we'll make it 1 rem, and 2 rem. So this is shortcode for the padding. So when you do just 1 rem, 2 rem, this is 1 rem on top and bottom, 2 rem on left and right. But before we wrote it all out separately because we did, you can only do the shorthand when it's the same on top and bottom. And then we'll do a border radius to make it rounded, have rounded corners of 2 rem. And then outline of none and border of none. So if we go back and refresh, there's no background just yet, but you can see the styles are taking effect. So let's do the button highlight. Let's make the background the highlight color, colon. Save that, go back and refresh. Perfect. Now let's add a hover state. So if we do hover, we can change the background. Another cool thing about SCSS is we can do something like darken, and then we'll grab the highlight color and we can darken it by something like 7.5%. So now if we go refresh, when we hover over it, it darkens this highlight variable, which is the D2674E, and it darkens that by 7.5%, and you don't have to figure out the math or hue or hex codes or anything. It does it all for you, which is amazing. One last thing, let's add a transition. transition. Let's change the background, 0.4s, and we'll do ease in out. So now if we go back and refresh, when we hover over, you can see instead of just snapping and changing, it eases in and then it eases out when you go over it. And let's do the same for the white button. So we'll do dot button white, and remember these styles are, or these classes we added to the HTML. So we'll do button white. Let's make the background white. Let's make the color dark, because currently the color is white. We don't want white on white. Let's add the same transition. So I'll copy that. And let's add a hover state for this as well. And we'll darken the white by 7.5%. And as you can see, these are different widths. So let's create a min width for the buttons. So I did right click and inspect element. Now inside of here, what I'm going to do is, so we'll go down to the button class, and I'm going to first do a display inline block. And then I'm going to add a min width to make sure these are both the same width. So we'll start with a 10 rem. That's a little too much. So I just want to get to a point where, and if you hold the option key, you can go in 0.1 integers or 0.1 steps. So let's make it a min width of 8.5 rem. So I'm going to copy these styles, go back to the button, and let's paste those in. Now if I refresh, it's got the min width, perfect. So let's go back to Sublime and the home.css. Let's add a margin just to these buttons for the home page. Let's make a margin top, say 1.5 rem, and then the sides we can do percentages. So I'll do 2.5%, 0 on the bottom, and then 2.5% on the left, or yeah, the left. Refresh. So now we have some spacing on the top, some on each side, and then nothing on the bottom. So this is almost done. This is not the font we chose in our style sheets. So what I'm going to do next is go to Google Fonts, search for Open Sans. Then if I open Sans in Google Fonts, I can select the fonts I want. So let's select the normal italic, bold, and bold italic. And if I go down to add this code to your website, step 3, let's just copy that. Then in our index.html, in the head, let's paste that in. And then we need to also add the font family. So let's copy this, step 4, integrate it with your CSS. And let's go to the application up top below the variables. I'm going to write body and paste that in so that the application uses Open Sans. Refresh, much better. So one last thing before we end. I'm very particular about how lines break. So you can see, discover your new favorite podcast. Podcast is on the second line, but in our design, it's on this line. So let's go into the HTML and add a BR tag after favorite. And BR stands for break. There we go. So now our homepage design is all coded up. So let's move on to the podcast page.